Welcome to another episode of Planet Possible. We're delighted that you're joining us to hear evidence-led discussion about topics that are critical to the way we manage our water and environment. A huge thanks to our season sponsor, Atkins Realis, and you'll hear a little bit more about them later. We're really grateful for their support in bringing the pod to you. If you're new to Planet Possible, I'm Niki Roach, and I'm a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, and a fellow of CIWEM, and that's the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. CIWEM members in over 90 countries are professionals that are shaping the future of our planet. In today's episode, we're taking the pod out and about, heading to just outside Harrogate in North Yorkshire to the Biohub at Ings Farm. It's a previously traditional upland sheep farm that's being transformed to adopt regenerative and circular agricultural practices while still keeping the sheep. It's on land that's owned by the local water company, Yorkshire Water, so I've got the perfect co-host to help us understand what this project is all about. The Environmental Planning and Governance Manager at Yorkshire Water, Claire Green. Welcome to Planet Possible, Claire.
Thank you, Nikki. Delighted to be here.
So let's start by understanding what the Biohub is, Claire.
Biohub is a regenerative agriculture initiative, and what that means is looking for more nature and climate friendly farming practices, and it's a demonstrator farm for something that's quite different to upland farming. So this is looking at quite a different circular approach, and including things such as agroforestry and circular composting type principles into the farming system design. What they're doing on the Biohub as well is around sourcing and managing food production and thinking differently about working with that supply chain on sustainable food production into the future.
Why is this project happening on an upland sheep farm on land that's owned by Yorkshire Water?
Broader context really is this sits within a broader set of kind of actions and principles around integrated catchment management, and that's really taking a systems approach to water management and the real intrinsic connection of water with land and how land is managed and used, and land as a key resource, you know, both for farming and for water production. So if you look broadly at Yorkshire, around 75% of Yorkshire's land is farmland, and for the water that we produce, around 1.3 billion litres a day for 5.5 million customers, that water comes predominantly from land that is farmed. So, you know, thinking about this in a systems way, these two industries need to work together to ensure quality water and to really ensure resilience and sustainability into the future. By tackling things really at source, you know, we could invest in more treatment technologies, more grey infrastructure. This is about maximising that opportunity to work with nature at source, to work with the farming community, and also to deliver much broader benefits to society, things like flood risk, tolerance, drought risk management, as well as improving things like biodiversity, carbon sequestration, you know, multiple benefits to broader society and the environment by working together in this way. Ultimately, all of this stems down to soil health. So it's all about improving the health of our soils and the general principles that, you know, if we can improve soils, improve the diversity of plants growing in the soils, we improve the soil organic moisture content, then all these things improve the ability to hold water. And by holding and slowing down water, that improves, you know, the quantity, particularly in drought periods, that sort of slow release reduces flood risk. Also, by slowing it down and having more natural processes, you get some of that natural treatment capability that the environment, you know, naturally possesses, really. Just slowing that down and allowing that kind of treatment to happen.
Okay, so I know that the Biohub is part of an initiative called Beyond Nature. Tell me a little bit more about what Beyond Nature is all about.
Beyond Nature is really taking integrated catchment management and systems thinking type of principles to the land that we own. So we own around a third of the land that is part of our catchments for our reservoirs. So reservoirs make up about 45% of the water that goes into drinking water. So all of this started around 8 years ago, where a farming tenancy became available, and it became this opportunity to sort of think a bit differently about managing our own land, and also the key role in terms of us as a landowner and a water company around really preserving, you know, the water resource into the future, both the quality and the quantity of the resource. And then over time, more and more of our farms have wanted to come under the Beyond Nature banner, help them navigate things such as the environmental land management scheme and things like sustainable farming incentive payments and things that they can do on their land to really maximise benefits across all of these different objectives.
That is a great introduction to the Biohub. Thank you so much, Claire, and Beyond Nature. Let's hear from some of the team on site. So I've just arrived at the Biohub at Ings Farm in North Yorkshire. This is really a landscape with lots of relatively deep valleys, some big reservoirs filling some of them, punctuated by these hills with this beautiful but barren moorland, probably quite a lot of peat under there. Plenty of sheep farming happening around here. It's a landscape that's been heavily farmed for a long time. And we're going to go and find out what the Biohub is all about.
Hi, I'm Lisa Harrowsmith, lead surveyor within Land and Property Department within Yorkshire Water. I developed the initiative in 2016, the Beyond Nature initiative.
I'm Dr Walsh, tenant farmer of Yorkshire Water. So the farm that we're looking at today is my farm, 37 hectares, and I've been here for just over 3.5 years.
I'm Andrew Walker, Catchment Strategy Manager at Yorkshire Water, here today to celebrate and promote the collaborative approach that we've taken here with Vincent, but also to talk more widely about how we've managed to take that over into the food and drink supply chain.
Okay, so we've just hopped out of the car. We've come down to the middle of the farm. So Vincent, describe a little bit. Where are we standing?
So we are standing near the lowest part of the farm. Really importantly, particularly from a Yorkshire Water perspective, right at the bottom of our farm is the Gill Brook. That brook feeds into the local reservoir. The original farmer, who's Derek Greenwood, he's 84 now. When I started working with him, he was 80. His eyes were wide open. He stopped spraying this site. It was 10 years when I came, so nearly 15 years it's not been sprayed with nitrogen, phosphates. No pesticide, herbicide, insecticide has been used and so on. So that was a kind of advantage because, you know, we're interested in reducing all that unnatural input. It's important to have sheep on this system. It'll be madness not to, because all the farmers around here are sheep farmers in one way or another. But also that makes it really difficult. Designing an ecosystem, implementing an ecosystem while having sheep on. Saying all that, this is what makes the programme exciting and interesting. What we'll do now over the next half an hour or so is we'll just take a walk through the farm and I'll show you particular features that we're trying to develop. I'm also going to be really honest about what I think has done well and what I think has been a bit of a nightmare and failed.
Okay, so we're going to head up through this kind of semi-improved grassland. It's really deep, actually. It's quite hard working. Go and have a look at the composting area. Just before we do that, there are molehills. Andrew, tell me more about what we're looking at.
Well, molehills are indicative really of a good healthy soil with a strong worm population, which is what high organic matter and good soils are all about. What Vincent's demonstrating here and what we've been able to do elsewhere in Yorkshire is demonstrate that actually farming with biology rather than chemicals and horsepower is definitely the way to go.
Just to take a step back as well, to get to this point, to do this project, particularly in an area of outstanding natural beauty, we have to do a lot of surveys, soil samples, carbon samples, MVC survey, which is National Vegetation Surveys, landscape appraisal. We did some penetrating radar work to have a kind of look what's under the soil. And I guess them surveys, coupled with just understanding the weather dynamics a little bit in this area, just the basics, where the sun's coming from, you know, the wind's coming from, where the frost would roll down the hill, etc. It virtually tells you how a particular design should be developed. So, for example, in this compost area, there's a number of reasons why the composting area is here, but it's also a number of reasons why we wouldn't plant trees in any of this area, because this is an area where we have lapwings and curlews, which are protected nesting birds. So something I haven't worked with before, without doing them surveys, I didn't know they were here, and also I didn't understand the significance and the volume of them. With any farming system, I guess you really need to have a understanding of local context, the wildlife and the protected species and so on.
Okay, Lisa, so explain to me the relationship between Vincent, who's the tenant farmer, and Yorkshire Water, who's the landowner. What's that dynamic like, and who manages stakeholder relationships?
So Yorkshire Water are the landowner, and the landlord, Regen Farm Co and Dr Vincent Walsh are the Yorkshire Water tenant who've taken on the farm business tenancy. They did that under the Beyond Nature programme, and as part of that programme, particularly in this area, it was the Nidderdale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. It's now been renamed Nidderdale National Landscape, so it is a protected landscape. The proposals here were quite challenging for what normally happens here, this sort of semi-improved land, but ultimately the goals here are the same as the goals for the Nidderdale National Landscape.
So there's one other member of our party today that we should introduce. So we've got Teasel, who is Lisa's beautiful dog that's joined us. So if you can hear a little bit of squeaking in the background. Do you want to say hello, Teasel? Okay, Vincent, tell us a little bit about the thinking that's gone into the concepts that you're applying here.
There's two major features, I guess: a circular farm, or the circular methodology for farm, and also regenerative methodologies. For me, where we get our concepts of regenerative design from is nature, particularly the biosphere. Like, the biosphere is the only energetically open, materially closed ecological life support system that we know of in our cosmos. It does a particular job, and it does it very, very well. Hence why it created mangroves, woodlands, forests, apex predators, and inevitably us. You know, without that complexity, we wouldn't be here. A regenerative system really means it has the ability to feed back. Well, this is what composting, or the upcycling part of the project, is about: feeding back. Everything that's on the farm, we don't want to take it off. So, for example, silage will usually be cut and taken directly off the farm. We're actually trying to develop the rich ecosystem, so we don't want any of that to leave. So we can use the carbon and nitrogen created on the farm. Why do we want to develop high value compost or biomass? Is to feed our agricultural systems. You can see here different elements of it. For example, at the moment it's got 25 metres of composting happening, and then we've got also 25 metres of shrub that is being cut down, which will be the first layer of the compost. So at the moment you can see wood chip, horse manure, grasses. It's actually got mushrooms in it. And actually when you go into this, you can start seeing, like, it's very warm. Can you see? You can see. It's extremely warm, and that's because it's being mixed properly. We'll turn this over. You could say this is an aerated compost system, just trying to generate as much rich biomass to feed the agricultural systems. What we're trying to do is bring everything in. A traditional farming system only wants the thing that they're farming. You know, so it might be a carrot. They don't want anything else, just rows of carrots. So they use pesticide and herbicide to kill everything else so they can grow the carrot. Our thinking is completely the other way. We want to try bring everything in and develop an equilibrium. But with that equilibrium, real challenges happen, because rabbits, hares, deers, sheep, you can't control them 365 days a year. So, you understand why traditional farming systems are the way they are, because actually they're highly effective. But we all know there's a knock-on effect to that. And then more complex ecosystems where you try to produce some food out of it, as well as everything else. That's what we're trying to do in this particular system.
Okay, so obviously the composting area that we're looking at is on quite a slope. We were just chatting about leachate. So Andrew, tell me your reflections on that.
Is using a brash as a base layer, which stops the whole composting thing going anaerobic, and you're more likely to have anything that leaching out actually doesn't leach out because it's been utilised within the composting system. So just down by the gate we were seeing some leachate coming out. They can be fairly pokey stuff. Clearly we don't want that getting anywhere near the water, so I'm intrigued to see how this system develops. And I just said to Vince, we know it's been successful if we find a beaver in here.
We'll keep our eyes peeled.
All the brash underneath the composting has come from this hedge, which you can see as it was a very mature, overgrown hedge, which would have been very gappy at the bottom and not stock-proof at all.
And a good hedgerow, you really want it thick. Hedgerow, I think they can increase 30% biodiversity on the farm. Hedge laying has been doing it for 1,000 years. We know it works. They're also multifunctional. Sheep can feed off them. They're also a barrier for sheep, so you don't need stone walls. Especially when this gets a little bit bigger, that you'll see that sheep will come in these areas and get a little bit of shade. With everything on the farm, it has to be multifunctional. We've got 10,000 metres of potential hedgerow across the farm. It's a lot of work to do. But with the sustainable farming incentive to do that work, and you know that you're going to get some kind of payment back.
Right, so we're at the top of the first field now, just heading through some really deep undergrowth. I'm going to try not to get stung by these stinging nettles. And you can probably hear the livestock that Vincent talked about in the background. And we've stopped in front of, I thought it was a stream. It's not, it's a ditch of water. It looks crystal clear from where I'm standing. What am I looking at, Vince?
So what this is what we call a swale on contour. And a contour line is basically shows you the level of how high you are or low you are on the map. Well, think about that. If all the contour lines are completely level, that means they hold water. If you design a line on contour, it'll hold water. So you can see here, this is a very small swale. It's more of a test swale than anything else. This swale is for a number of reasons: giving sheep access, holding water for longer in the landscape, particularly for the curlews, lapwings, all the living things. And as you see the more developed swales, particularly ponds and dams that we've put in, you'll see the huge amount of life that has just come from nowhere. So we know by putting water features in, what they do increase the biodiversity. And that's going to be so important for this farm, because we are putting fruit trees in, and therefore they will get attacked by aphids, etc. So we need things in that will eat them aphids. And water features is a really good way of creating the right conditions for life.
So we're walking alongside this swale that's on the contour lines. Is there any reason why this approach couldn't be adopted in more traditional farming methodologies?
I can't see why not. A lot of what Vince is demonstrating here takes a significant leap of faith. I don't think anybody particularly likes change, but if we can demonstrate that these are offering multiple benefits or outcomes, from livestock drinking to reducing the amount of water that's leaching off, potentially the amount of sediments that is leaving the catchment, that's got to be a good thing. But we've been working in collaboration with farmers for a long time, and it requires both parties, if you like, to build up a level of trust. And when we first started working with the agricultural community, particularly not on Yorkshire Water land, there was a sort of, why Yorkshire Water in the room? So we're actually showing that if you work in collaboration to identify outcomes that each party wants from the landscape, and then go and talk to the people that know the landscape best, you can actually change perceptions and viewpoints quite quickly. We've been working around the Vale of York now for 5 years, and what we wanted to do was to try and initiate some sort of cultural and behavioural change within the farming community. So whilst we had a specific problem with metaldehyde, which is the active ingredient in slug pellets, we chose to take a more whole farm approach, saying, you know, if we're detecting these sorts of chemicals in the water, you're potentially wasting a resource. So how can we make you become more efficient, more profitable and more resilient? So over the last 15 years, we've now got around 14% of the arable land in Yorkshire is now engaged in one of our sustainable landscapes programmes, and that's all about promoting soil health, soil farm profitability. Leaving soil fallow, some people might say, why would you leave soil fallow? You're not getting anything out of it. I like to regard things like permanent grassland or fallow land as the opportunity to service your soil. So as with any machine, to get the best out of it, you've got to service it. But we're also sequestering through the use of things called cover crops, which are temporary crops, almost like pop-up rainforests, that you can grow between cash crops. In 12 weeks, you can average about 4 tonnes carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare. Personally, I think that's enormous. People say trees may be the answer. They certainly are in the right place, the right reason. But I like trees, but they're a bit chewy. So I'd rather produce something that I can eat. Through the programme, we've also been fortunate to develop with the Baker Institute in Texas what we think is the world's first verified arable soil carbon credit. So I think it's an immensely exciting time for farming. We should be supporting it, because farming, if done correctly, like Vince is doing, really does have the opportunity to mitigate a whole range of impacts that we seem to be experiencing at the moment, whether that's a changing climate, weather, whatever it may be. But we do need to ensure that we produce good, sustainable, resilient, healthy crops and produce within Yorkshire and the wider country.
Right, so come through into another field. Tell me what we're standing in front of, Vincent.
Well, yeah, we're getting to a point of the farm now where you're going to start seeing some of the production systems. Where we have production systems, we also want to hold water in them landscapes as much as possible. For example, lots of dragonflies, for example, would be really helpful because the aphids, as you can see, there's a quite large one there. Also stuff like frogs, perfect because they eat stuff like slugs and so on. Smaller and larger birds also eat aphids. We've got a family of ducks who come here. And so you see over the time that these water features do have an impact. What you're looking at the moment is integrated dams. This work is very small. It's not about huge groundwork. It's not about huge machinery. The water features are very small, but we try put them in strategic places. We're not diverting the water in any way. The water is going where it's always gone. All we done is created a system where we're holding it for a little bit longer.
I mean, this is amazing. So this is 4 dams, is that right, we're looking at?
I think 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's 5, 5 altogether.
And are they, would you call them leaky dams or?
Yeah, exactly. The water's running over the dam.
So we've stopped at the top of a field full of rows of fruit trees. Tell me what we're looking at, Vincent.
In terms of the tree lines and also the species of trees, we've tried to put lots of different varieties in here, and huge amount of them haven't worked, and some of them have. For example, there's 101 apples just in this block and 93 varieties of that apple, a number of varieties of mints, lots of different varieties of elderberries, blackcurrants, blackberries, which really haven't worked. I don't think there's any left in the system at all. This block is trying to kind of understand what works and then trying to use some of that intelligence on the next block. But even that method doesn't work, because on the other blocks they're actually a lot wetter. So some of the new trees that we put on the next blocks just have died last year as well. It's a complete learning curve all the time. It's really frustrating when you lose trees, because it costs money, it's time, and they also then take time to develop, and then they get destroyed. It's heartbreaking, to be honest. But it is what it is. I'm not shy of saying that. You know, if this is simple, that loads of this would be happening, but the thing is that it definitely isn't. In terms of the trees going forward, I think 2 trees that have worked well is the Yorkshire green apple and the Bramley seeding. Mints have done amazing, particularly apple mints. So we're creating our first sorbets and so on out there at the moment. An apple mint sorbet and a blackcurrant, small leaf blackcurrant sorbet, which are going into Burnley FC, because that's the nearest stadium. So yeah, all the food will go into sports stadiums. That's my client.
Stealing mint to take home with me, which is fantastic. I have a nice mint tea on behalf of all of this. Our 2024 season of Planet Possible is supported by one of the leading engineering and design consultancies in the world, Atkins Realis. Here at Planet Possible, we bring a diverse range of voices from across the international water and environment sector to explore how to tackle some of the biggest challenges we face. And that aligns perfectly with the Atkins Realis purpose of engineering a better future for our planet and its people. We're really grateful to Atkins Realis for enabling us to bring another exciting year of Planet Possible to you.
We have a number of layers on this tree line. So there's 16 blocks in each line, and then we have nitro fixes, which are the top tree. Then underneath that we have our production tree, so an apple, a medlar, and that's a hazel. And then underneath that we have 6 blackcurrants, so these are these bushes. And then underneath that then we have mints,
which, just as an aside, smells absolutely amazing. This is not the kind of mint you get in my garden. This is ginormous. It smells phenomenal.
It's done extremely well. Underneath that, it's not in this block, but we have then comfrey. On the actual floor itself, we inoculate oyster mushrooms with wood chip, which basically takes wood matter and turns it back into nutrients for the soil. And then each plant has been put in with mycorrhizal fungus, which connects basically all the roots together. And then also in each line, we've also put 20 kilos of lobworms in, which are the big fat lobworms, go down about 1 metre. You can see the difference already. You know, we've only been here, putting stuff in 2 years. You can just feel that, that there's biomass and just a little bit more diversity in the formation of the soils.
Vince, can I just ask a question, whether you could elaborate a bit more about the mycelium fungus and how they communicate with the plants and the roots and exudates, and how they in effect help each other, because it's fascinating.
Really good question. Look, the way particularly woodlands and forests move nutrients is through fungus. That is their purpose. And the reason fungus do that is because they also increase their own capacity for life by doing it. So mycorrhizal fungus they connect to different roots. They call it hyphae. It's the white stuff in between the soils, and it'll connect from one tree to another. It'll know, for example, even like a mile away. So at the end of this tree, on this tree line, we had an autumn olive. takes up potassium really well, deep tapping roots, and there's an apple at the other end which has small tapping roots, and you could say doesn't take up potassium as well. Well, as the fungus it connects all the trees, it'll know where nutrients are, and nutrients are lacking, and it'll basically circulate that nutrient to different plants and different trees and shrubs, etc. Because it understands by making a healthy ecosystem, it also expands its own ecosystem. It's no surprise that fungus is by far the largest living organism we know.
Lisa, we're stood in front of another swale, is that right? But definitely much bigger than the last one we saw.
This is far larger. This is one of the 56 swales, and this is at the middle of the farm, but the top of this newly planted field to hold the water back here.
And what's different to the other swale that we saw, other than the fact that it's much larger, is that there's also quite a lot of material, so some relatively large logs and just a lot of vegetation sat in the bottom of the swale. Vince, what's the reason behind the way this one's designed?
In a way, over time, what you want this to fill back up and become soil. So instead of that clayey stuff you see there, which doesn't allow water, it sits on the top of the clay and then goes across the landscape. By doing this and by adding biomass into it, firstly, if lambs get in there, they can get out. That'll end up forming soil over many, many years, but it'll end up forming a biomass that will just hold water very well. Also, you can see across the swale, there's 3 lines of trees that are being put in. We can also tap the water into these 3 lines. Now we're holding it. Before we were holding water, we couldn't manage the water to put it where we want it. If this fails, it's really easy. You get the digger in and you just push the soil back over and it's done. You can't go wrong with swales, because if you just decide actually it's not a good idea to put them there, it doesn't work, you can just put the soil back.
Lisa, we're in quite deep grass here. The heads of this grass are probably up to my waist, and then just as we come through, there's a pond that's just appeared and there's butterflies. Tell me where we are and what we're having a look at.
We're into the next field now. Vincent's just planted this year, and down here there's 9 of these ponds. This is what we're aiming for over there as well. I think you can probably hear the water trickling down. There's 9 of these all interlinking and just sort of leaking one over the other and holding all that water back. So I think Andrew's got some vegetation there.
It looks like watercress. I don't know whether it is. It might just be bog standard podweed, but if it is watercress, that is, in my very limited experience, very indicative of very clean water.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've come to the far edge of the farm actually, and we're looking down another field of beautiful kind of grassland. There's a farm building in the distance and then a row of trees. But what are we actually looking at, Lisa?
So we stood in the Washburn Valley in Nidderdale. Beyond those trees on the horizon is Humberston Bank Farm, which is a 904 hectare upland farm, and that is where our Beyond Nature initiative started. So in 2015 the family asked me to come to a family meeting and they wanted to retire. And so we were looking at the values you could get from land and not just rental values. We were looking at the various ecosystem services and the values that we could get through different options. And so the option we went for was sort of farming and food production, but with a heavy emphasis on nature. We had various objectives that we were going for: water quality, biodiversity, reputational, societal objectives. And then we invited partners and how they would like to join us in delivering our vision and what their vision for the farm would be. We took on a fairly young farmer locally to deliver that, and it was so successful. That's when we started trying to expand the initiative across the estate. So I've now got over 10,000 hectares signed up and various farmers. We work in partnership with the tenants, and it is very much in partnership and looking at their business and what they want to deliver, as well as us as a water company with particular emphasis on raw water quality.
Okay, so we have walked down the hill, back down to one of the lower parts of the farm again, in another field full of very long grass and a huge amount of trees, much more than we've seen further up the farm. This is significantly more dense.
So this is our coppice system, 8,000 coppice trees, 14 varieties on 5 different rotations. The larger trees, which are the oaks, basically at the back, and then the smaller trees on the smaller rotations, which will be stuff like lime, hazels at the nearer end. It's a multifunctional system. Why is this here, not at the top of the farm? It's here because the 8,000 trees are going to clean the water up before it hits the Gill Brook. That's one of the major reasons it's here. It's also all the biomass from here will be mixed with this biomass is carbon, isn't it? And the grasses, that's nitrogen. And what makes good compost? Carbon and nitrogen. The grasses will get mixed into the wood chip that gets taken off here, and you can see that we're going to be starting to be able to develop all our own biomass on site, which I think is a really important part of any farm, to be self-efficient. You know, like a woodland creates its own nitrogen, its own carbon, and we kind of need to mimic that.
And I think it looks full of life. I mean, even just standing here, butterflies flying around us, a whole range of different species of grass, thistles and all sorts of things around the trees. Can I just check I understand though then, Vincent? So you're growing all of this to cut it down to use on site, no, or is any of this going off site? What's the intention?
No, anything we bring on site doesn't go off site anymore. Some silage is cut and it might go to our sheep, but nothing is being cut and then sold for like £15-20 because we need it on site. This is a test bed. It's a more of an R&D site rather than a full commercial system. But the idea is I use this to get another farm. The idea is to scale and produce as much food as well as all the ecosystem benefits for Yorkshire Water, Levy and Corn Foods.
So what's going off site specifically at the moment, or what's planned to go off site once you're up and running fully?
Apples, pears, mints, blackberries, and so I've got a food company called Herbalism. I'll process that, fermentation, dehydration and cold pressing. Some of the apples are all juice apples, so they'll be juiced. Dessert apples. Well, sorbet is a really good one because we can create it with the mint, but we can then hold that for at least 12 months to have sorbet on site and to sell it to our food service companies in the right way. Again, nothing's plain sailing. There's a huge amount of learning and small scale stuff happening. But what we are proving is we can design an ecosystem, we can be collaborative, we can produce food, we can get that food into venue and we can get it onto a plate to be served to their customers. So at the moment we've got 6 beehives. Bees are going to be critical for this site. Not just production bees, but also general bees in this area. What we don't want to do is have a flux of honeybees only in this area. So we need bees because of pollination. That's why we've got 6 hives at the moment. We were thinking we end up with 18 hives, 6 apiaries over the 37 hectares in time.
All right, Vincent, we've got back to where we started. We're next to the compost heaps again. It's been an extraordinary tour. Thank you so much. If there was one kind of takeaway that you'd want listeners to have from the experience that you've had over the last few years here at the farm, what would that be?
Well, I guess the premise of this project is not to just think about what we can farm, is to more think about how we can create the right conditions for more life in the system. That's really what we're trying to do. So do we want to produce some food? Yes, we do. Do we want to create a habitat which is better for sheep? Yes, we do. But I also want to create a habitat where birds thrive, where butterflies thrive, where bees want to be. It's trying to think about the ecosystem rather than how much food can we get out of the system. And then we have to think about, okay, how do we make that economically viable? You know, and that's about carbon, it's about biodiversity net gains, it's about sustainable farming incentives, it's about DEFRA, it's about Innovate UK monies, and it's also about raising investment from the food companies. So that's how we make it happen. But it's also about influencing the wider farming community. I think future farms is not about how much we can farm, it's about how much you can bring life back into a system.
Okay, Andrew, so we've just got back to the very start of the farm now, and we've heard a huge amount about food production and sort of circular economy, but we've not talked loads about why Yorkshire Water are so interested and invested in this project. So tell me a little bit about that.
I think water quality, quantity, soil management, they all go hand in hand. You know, the primary filtration system, if you like, is when the water falls out of the sky. It's how it interacts with the land. Quite often that can be a negative impact in that it can bring in sediments and agrochemicals that wouldn't ordinarily be there. So a more holistic view on how you manage soils will deliver a better water quality and a more stable water quantity going forward.
I think this is it's just trying different things and don't be frightened of failure. There are things here, and Vincent's very honest with things that have failed. Whilst it's a failure, it's a positive in that we're learning from that. We can take that learning to other farms. It's not right for every farm, but we can certainly spread what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, Claire, so great to hear what's happening on site, what's working, and interestingly, I think also where some of the challenges have been. So I imagine that there is plenty of learning coming out of the Biohub. Tell me a little bit more about what that is.
Biohub is in its, I believe it's second year now, so even learning from the first year has been taken to the second year. And I think, as we've just heard as well, what works in one field doesn't necessarily work in another. So a lot of learning there, even just on site. There are plans to expand the Biohub now going forwards, and certainly a lot more interest from the broader food and drink supply chain. And they're all thinking about their long-term sustainability and how important it is that their food produced is, low carbon, meets low water usage, meets long-term sustainability objectives. The other big learning really is about, sharing that knowledge. And Vincent's done a great job already sharing the knowledge, the good things, the things maybe that didn't work so well, the learning, farmers talking to farmers and seeing what's happening on the ground, chatting with them, finding out what's worked, what hasn't, supporting them to try something different if they want to do that. How can it be applied elsewhere, and supporting the application of that elsewhere, both on Yorkshire Water's land and also working with other landowners, agriculture, farmers and the food and drink supply industry to kind of take that learning a bit wider, changing the upland farming from traditional sort of sheep farming into agroforestry. That's quite a big change, to a farming system practice. But there's actually quite a lot of the principles that are being applied here that can easily be applied within an existing, more traditional sort of sheep farming environment. So one of those would be the way that, Vincent and the team there are managing water across the site through different swales and holding water. And we've seen the impact of the very dry year we had a couple of years ago in 2022. The impact that's had on farming is significant, and likewise this last 12 months has been very challenging, and it's all been too much or too little water right when you don't need it, essentially. So managing water in a different way across the land, really important, holding it back, slowing down the flow. And that's of great benefit to Yorkshire Water as well in terms of the water quality and quantity. And I think the second thing that Vincent's brought is, this whole kind of looking at it as an ecosystem and thinking about, more variety and how beneficial that is to biodiversity, and has other benefits as well. So vets have made comments that sheep generally are healthier, need less, I suppose, medicines, etc., because they've got a more varied diet, can have more protein content as well, which is sort of a benefit in ultimately meat production from a sheep farming perspective. So, and also more organic content holds more water. And I think we've seen on arable farms, haven't we, that a 1% increase in soil organic carbon content in a hectare, delivers something like 150,000 to 200,000 extra litres of water can be stored. Now, what we don't know is what that looks like on, upland farming, and that'd be very interesting to sort of quantify into the future. But there's certainly, a lot of benefit here to moving along this more sustainable route.
Okay, so my final question, and you know what's coming because I offer everybody the Planet Possible magic wand. So if I passed it across to you, Claire, gave it a wave, what would you like to make possible?
Really, to make this change, we're looking at landscape scale interventions, and to do that, we really need to be thinking much broader around integrated approaches to catchment management, thinking of things as a system. And I think we've got an opportunity with a land use framework that is yet to be published, and potentially to sort of influence that framework and look at all of these different spatial pieces of policy, river basin management, flood risk management plans, local nature recovery strategies. What can we do to bring all of these things and needs together into an overarching framework that helps us to sort of maximise these broader benefits? It's all about long-term sustainability. And I think as part of that, it's having this framework focusing on outcomes. It's having this flexibility locally. Finally, I think we need to think about how do we value and measure some of these benefits so that we can truly value this as a society going forward. There's a big opportunity here, I think, with the land use framework to align some of these spatial planning frameworks and really enable these things to happen and build on some of the work that's happening anyway as part of the food and drink supply chain, who are aiming to be, certainly the bigger companies, aiming to be more sustainable in their operations into the future.
I love that you went big, like landscape scale change. It's brilliant.
Oh, yeah, not asking for much, am I?
Well, what I love is that we've seen some of it in action already happening, and it's great to see it being tested, and it's great to see that the supply chain, as you've just said, the food and drink supply chain, are as engaged as they are actually. And so I think the Biohub for me was living proof that it's not happening in isolation, which is brilliant. So as ever, time's flown, and here we are at the end of another episode of Planet Possible. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found the conversation insightful. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. You can subscribe to Planet Possible on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode, and we love to hear your ratings and reviews too. We've got more fantastic guests and topics lined up for the rest of the year, so I do hope you'll keep joining us for those. And all that leaves me to say is a huge thank you to my superb guests, Dr Vincent Walsh, Lisa Harrowsmith, Andrew Walker, and of course my co-host Claire Green. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much.
That's it, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.